So John wrote in his first epistle, he wrote these wonderful words that we probably should all really commit to memory. But it says, "Do not love the world, nor the things of the world or in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh, and the desires of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not from the Father, but is from the world." And we see this happening in Genesis. This is kind of what we see throughout Genesis, is these three types of desires: the desires of the eyes, the desires of the flesh, and the pride of life, where you could actually translate that the pride of lifestyle, right? Those three things are what we see constantly going on in Genesis. As we see sin, we see these things develop. So when we go back to Adam and Eve, right, the very first thing that we see with Adam and Eve is talking to the serpent, and then she ultimately is going to look at the fruit, and she's going to see that the fruit looks nice. It's a desire to the eyes, that it's good, that it looks tasty, and it looks like it's going to be satisfying. So there is the desire of the flesh. And ultimately, it will make her wise. It will make her like God, is what Satan says to her. The pride of life. We see that also here with Lot. We didn't read this part. We're going to go back in just a second and look. But we see this going on in Lot's life as well. There is this lust of the eyes, the desire of the eyes, the desire of the flesh, and the pride of lifestyle going on with Lot. So let's go real quick to Genesis chapter 13. Go back just a page or so. Abram and Lot. Abram is Lot's uncle. And they both have somehow, over the time period, God has blessed both of them and given them a lot of stuff and a lot of flocks. And they are there together, and they have been traveling together, but they finally get to a point where the flocks are so big that Lot's men are arguing with Abram's men, and they're talking about and arguing over where and how they're going to feed their animals, because there's just not enough grass to feed all of the flocks. And this is my spot, this is our spot, and they just argue together. There's this big dispute that has risen up between them. And so Abram decides that he's going to seek and make things better. And so he goes up to Lot and says, "Hey, Lot, there's this problem. I don't want animosity to come between us as family. So why don't you decide where you want to go? Look over all the land. You decide what's going to be good for you. And you do that, and I'll just go the opposite direction. And that way that we can keep the peace here." And so we see in Genesis 13:10 these words. "And Lot lifted up his eyes and saw the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt in the direction of Zoar." So Lot sees the Jordan Valley, right? And he sees that it's really nice. And not only is it really nice, not only is it beautiful, it's like the garden of the Lord. It's like Eden. And it's just, there's so much abundance there. So there's so much that is going to not only feed his flock, but it's going to feed him as well. And so there is this desire not only of the eyes, because the valley looks nice, but there's also the desire of the flesh, because there's all this sustenance there that, hey, who cares what Abram's going to do? This is mine. I can have this part. It's going to keep me well fed. It's going to keep my flocks well fed. And there's this idea also that it is the pride of lifestyle, because as long as he has the food and he has the sustenance, well, he can absolutely keep up the same life that he had. His flocks are going to get bigger, and his flocks are going to be more productive. He's going to have a greater lifestyle here. And so we see that this is the idea that Lot has. Now, whether or not he realized that he was going through the desires of the eyes, the desires of the flesh, and the pride of lifestyle or not isn't the issue. The issue is that we see that this is exactly what is going on in his life. And so Abram is pretty much at this point left with a bunch of nothing. Look at verse 12, 13:12. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled among the cities of the valley and moved his tent as far as Sodom. So temptation basically has taken Lot away from Abram into the valley, because there's just so much abundance there. But then it goes a little bit further than that. Temptation also takes him to the edge of Sodom. And what we see in chapter 14, verse 12, is that it not only just takes him to the edge of Sodom. At this point, in chapter 13, he's at the edge of Sodom. But ultimately, 14:12 shows us that he has actually gone into Sodom, and he is living in Sodom. There's just too much temptation there. So he ends up living in Sodom, and so there in Sodom, the king, a whole bunch of kings, king of Sodom, and some other kings decided that they had had enough of this other king whom they had to pay tribute to. And so they said, hey, let's just, if we just join forces together, then we can ultimately take over and not have to pay tribute to this king. So we just need to combine all our forces together and do this. And so that's what they decided ultimately to do. They figured that combining their powers together, they could defeat him. But it didn't work. Laomer defeated them. And after he defeated them, he went in and he took their people captive, including the people in Sodom. So look with me at verse 12. Chapter 14, verse 12. They also took Lot, the son of Abram's brother, who was dwelling in Sodom, and his possessions went their way. This is where we pick up this morning. Lot has been taken captive by the king. They've been taken away, he and his family have been taken away with all of their possessions. So as we continue on with this gospel, the genesis of the gospel, I want us to see that ultimately the gospel deals not just with, well, Jesus died on the cross for you and then he rose from the dead. That is true. That is the gospel. But it goes further than that, because if we truly believe that Jesus lived the perfect life, that he died the death, the substitutionary death for us, and that he rose again on the third day, then all of our lives should be impacted and we should be living out the gospel day by day. We should be living out, it should change who we are intrinsically so that outwardly we are also changed. So it strengthens us in our weariness. Let me go back real quick, because it puts us into action, first off. It strengthens our weariness as well, and it brings a joy that cannot be expressed. So as we're looking at 17 through 24 this morning, I want us to look at 3 points, because I'm a good Baptist. They're all alliterative, because I'm a really good Baptist. Right? So the first thing is the battle. The second thing is the bread. The last thing is the blessing. Those are the 3 points that I want us to take a look at. Because this is the gospel. This is the genesis of the gospel. We see this played out with Abram, and we should be seeing it played out in our lives as well. And so the first thing that we see is the battle. Abram heard the news that his nephew Lot has been taken captive by the king, and so he's going to go into battle. So let's look at verses 14 through 16 real quick as we go into verse 17 in just a moment. When Abram heard that his kinsman had been taken captive, he led forth his trained men born in his house, 318 of them, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. And he divided his forces against them by night, he and his servants, and defeated them and pursued them to Hobah, north of Damascus. Then he brought back all the possessions, and also brought back his kinsman Lot with his possessions, and the women, people. So there are 3 things, 3 lessons that I want us to learn here in these few verses this morning. So the first one is, don't give up on family when they fail you. Don't give up on family when they fail you. In the case of Abram and Lot, we're talking about physical relatives. We're talking about biological relatives. Abraham is the uncle, Lot is the nephew. And there are going to be times where our biological family is going to fail us. They're going to fail us tremendously. They're going to go against everything that we believe in. Don't give up on them. In fact, go after them. But beyond that, there are going to be times where our spiritual family, our brothers and sisters in Christ, are going to fail us. They're going to go the opposite direction that we would never have expected them to go. They're going to go there, and we don't give up on them. We go after them. That's what we see Abram doing with Lot. That's what we ought to be doing as well with our family members, is going after them, not giving up on them. And there are times that you're going to fail others as well. And hopefully your desire is that they will not give up on you. Pursue them. Not to punish them, but to restore them. Go with me real quick to James. We finished James a few weeks ago, but let's go back real quick. James, the last chapter of James, James chapter 5. Last two verses. James 5, 19 and 20. My brothers, if anyone among you wanders from the truth and someone brings him back, let him know that whoever brings back a sinner from his wandering will save his soul from death and will cover a multitude of sins. If you see someone wandering, if it is your brother or sister in Christ, if there is somebody here at Highland View Baptist Church and you see that they are beginning to wander away from the truth, away from the faith, you go after them. You don't let them continue. But you go to rescue them from themselves, from their sin. This isn't really, it's not optional. It's a command. We go after them. It is our duty as Christians to go after our brothers and sisters in Christ if we see them in sin. We go to restore them, right? That's what we're supposed to do. Paul says in Galatians chapter 6, if you want to go there, Galatians 6:1, he says, brothers, if anyone is caught in transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Keep watch on yourself, lest you too be tempted. So now it's not just James that's talking about this. This is Paul that's telling us to do the same thing. We are to go after our loved ones to bring them back into the faith, to bring them back into the fold. It is not just the shepherd's job to rescue the sheep. It is also the sheep's job to rescue each other. Abram pursued those who had captured Lot. And in many ways, we could probably say, well, it's kind of Lot's fault, isn't it? He's the one that was all selfish and prideful and wanted to have that land for himself and his flock and wasn't willing to share it with Abram and his flock. He's the one that went over into and parked his tent right next to Sodom and ultimately went into Sodom. And so it's really kind of his fault, isn't it? He's putting himself into these situations. Why is it then that Abram should feel any obligation to go after Lot when Lot is the one who did this to himself? Because Abram loved Lot. And when you love someone, you do not let them wander away. You do not let them just stay captive to the enemy. You go after them. I love, and I'm probably not going to get this right, this is probably more paraphrasing, but I love what Spurgeon has said. He said, if they are going to go, if they insist on going to hell, let them go to hell leaping over your body. Don't let them in there willingly. You get there and you try to stop them with everything that you are. That's the first thing. Don't give up on your family when you fail them. Number two, you can't do this alone. You can't fight your battle alone, and you can't help others alone. Abram was not foolish enough to think that he could go against this king who has defeated 5 kings and their armies by himself. Apparently he was foolish enough to think he could take 318 men with him and do it. But he went. He didn't do it alone. He wasn't going to go there by himself. He had help, 318 men. These weren't just any people. These weren't just anybody. These were Abram's servants. They were part of his household. They were people that he knew, people that he trusted, people that were part of him, from a lot of them from birth. People he had trained. He knew them his whole life. Notice in Galatians chapter 6, if you want to go back there, you can look again, but notice in Galatians chapter 6, verse 1, Paul says, brothers. Adelphoi, brothers and sisters, we could say. Not just, hey, brother, when you see somebody wandering away, you need to go by yourself and talk to them. No. Brothers, if you see this happening, brothers and sisters, if you see this happening, and then he uses the plural pronoun for it. You guys, you all go. It's not just one person. person. It's everybody. If you see it, go. You who are all spiritual, you all who are spiritual, you guys, go. We do realize that when somebody goes astray spiritually, when they go astray because of a spiritual conflict there is some type of spiritual warfare going on in their lives. And we are foolish to think that we can go and conquer all by ourselves. We need one another. We can't do it alone. Jesus said you can take one. You go yourself. If you see it, you go yourself. But if they don't repent at that time, you've got to take somebody else. Take 2 or 3. If they still don't repent, you bring it to the entire church. Because there's hope in numbers. We don't go on our own. There is strength in numbers. We don't go on our own. Find those who are spiritual to help you. At minimum, to pray with you, but to go with you as well. You need others who are spiritual to help you in spiritual battle. Number 3, be careful. Abram and his men, if you look at it, if you go back and read the text again, they didn't just like in the daytime, in the middle of the day, just kind of go head on with the king. They went at night. They fought all night, and some of them came from this way, and some came from this way, and some came from behind, and maybe some came from the fore, but it was all at night. They had a strategy, they had a plan that was going on. They weren't just going to go head on. There was planning that had happened beforehand. They were being ultra careful. Again, this king and his army beat the 5 kings and their armies. They had to do something different. We need to do something different if we see this happen. So often we are not very careful when we go and confront somebody else. First off, we haven't gotten anybody to come with us. But secondly, we haven't bathed it in prayer. We haven't prepared our hearts. We haven't prepared our minds. We haven't asked the Lord to prepare their hearts and minds. We just go and we shoot off at the mouth. We do more damage than good. You better believe that Abram and his men had a strategy. You better believe that the enemy, our enemy, the enemy who is leading our family astray, has a strategy. The question is, do we? See, the gospel unites you and other believers together so that you can face this world together. To face the enemy together. This is why we desperately need to be in church. This is why we need to be a member of a church, so that our brothers and sisters are there that can live with us and work through these things with us and strategize together and fight the battle together. Look at me real quick. 1 Peter chapter 5. I love what 1 Peter says here. Or what Peter says here in 1 Peter. Peter says, be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. Resist him firm in your faith, knowing that the same kinds of sufferings are being experienced by your brotherhood throughout the world. And we see this and we're like, okay, so Paul is like writing to like one person here or something like that. No, he's writing to the church. You need to be careful, church, because Satan is walking around. He's like a lion. He's looking for someone to devour. He is looking for somebody in your church that he may accost, that he may attack, that he may devour. Don't let that happen. Always be watchful, guys. Always be looking. We're not alone in this. We have people all through the world that are dealing with what we are dealing with. And some may be in this same building. Take strength from each other. Bear one another's burdens. Fight for and with one another. Prepare for battle together. So there's the battle. You've got to be prepared. You've got to be ready for it. Let's go on to the bread. Going back to Genesis chapter 14. Abram and his men, victorious, came back with the people, with all the goods they were supposed to. They had fought all night. They chased the armies back. Now they're headed home. It's been a long night. Very long night. Probably weary, tired, hungry. But weeping they tarry for the night. Joy comes in the morning. There's victory. There's joy. At this point, they're still tired and hungry. Their legs are aching. Their arms are aching. They have tired eyes. Their minds probably are a little bit weary from being up all night as well. So we see in verse 17, after his return from the defeat of Kedar-Laomer, I say that when I'm alone so easily. When I'm in front of everybody, I can't say the word. Kedar-Laomer and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet him in the valley of Shaveh, that is the king's valley, and Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest, God Most High. Two quick observations here. First off, we need to remember that Sodom was full of wicked men. That's what Moses tells us. Full of wicked men. The king is no different. We need to understand that, right? The king's no different than the other wicked men. He has a reason for coming. But wicked men and wicked thoughts and wickedness itself will seek to take advantage of us in our times of weariness. We need to understand that. And now a lot of times that weariness will come right after a victory. Do you know when most pastors resign? Mondays. Most pastors resign on Monday. Because they have preached once, twice, 3 times, however many times, how big the church is. They are tired. Things didn't go the way that they wanted. And maybe that's happened for a few weeks now. And they feel ineffective. And they have had wonderful victories, but they can't see them. They become weary. They call in Monday and say, done. So often the weariness comes after a victory. Satan's seeking someone to devour. And because there may have been some victories also, there may have been just their eyes looked down. They weren't being as sober. They weren't being as vigilant as they ought to have been. But it also comes because they're tired, because they're hungry. We see here in this story that the king of Sodom is about to pounce. He comes after Abram, immediately after the war, which leads us to number 2. But before the king of Sodom can sink his teeth into Abram, Melchizedek allows Abram to sink his teeth into bread. He brought him bread and wine. Bread to sustain him, wine to bring again that restoration. We see that Jesus does the same thing here. I love what Spurgeon says about this verse. He says this. He says, when we are weary with fighting the Lord's battles, we may expect Jesus will appear to our refreshment. Melchizedek, in bringing out the bread and the wine, actually prepared Abram to fight another battle, albeit a different, maybe a lesser battle. Having eaten, having received the blessing that we're going to talk about in just a few moments, in the midst of the blessing, the king of Sodom is basically like, okay, I've had enough. I've got something to say. He interrupts the blessing. He interrupts Melchizedek from what he has to say and the whole blessing. And then we see, if we go to verse 21, we see, and the king of Sodom said to Abram, give me the persons, but take the goods for yourself. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted my hand to the Lord, God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. Now, real quick. We haven't talked about it yet, but you will notice these words in the blessing. Abram is using the language that Melchizedek used in the blessing to fight the battle against the king of Sodom. He has been refreshed, he has been renewed, and he is using what the Lord has given him through Melchizedek in order to defeat the king of Sodom in this battle. There's a possessor of heaven and earth that I should not take a thread or a sandal strap or anything that is yours, lest you should say, I have made Abram rich, and I will take nothing but what the young men have eaten, and the share of the men who went with me. Let Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre take their share. I'm not taking the thing. Now here's the thing about it. Who went to battle? Who went out to war? It's okay. This is just a softball question. Who went out to war? Abram did. Abraham. He went out to war. Who won the battle? It's another softball. Abram. Yeah, Abram won the battle. Who got all the spoils from the war? Who got them from the battle? Same person, same name. Abram did. Who owns all the spoils? Not the king of Sodom. Well, yes. Technically God does, yes. But Abram, at this point, owns the spoils. They don't belong to the victor go the spoils. Abram owns them all. This is like Satan coming up to Jesus and saying, hey, look at all those kingdoms in the world. I'll give them to you if you bow down to me. You don't own them, Satan. Christ owns them all. He is the King of kings and Lord of lords. He is the ruler of all kings. Not you. He owns them. King of Sodom comes out to Abram. He's got all the spoils. He's got everything. He's got all the riches. And he says, hey, I'll tell you what. I'll let you have all the spoils. No. You let me have all the spoils? I don't think so. I own all the spoils. I am the one. You lost them all. I'm the victor. I get to have them. That's not what Abram says, but he could have, because he owned them. But instead he says, no, I'm not going to take a thing from you. I give it all back to you. You can have it all. Because I don't want you to say, I have made Abram rich. In other words, Abram would be beholden to no one. It has nothing to do with, well, I want God to give me all my money, right? He had no problem when Pharaoh gave him his money, right? It says, here's some provisions, you go on now, right? He had no problem doing that. He didn't want to be beholden to Sodom, to the king of Sodom. He didn't want anybody to come up and say, hey, I made you rich, you owe me. None of that was going to happen. We may never know for sure, but I am very suspicious because of Abraham's use of language here that he has sworn to God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, that things may have been different if he had not taken the bread and the wine. He comes back weary, he comes back hungry, he comes back tired. Would he have given a different answer? You might know when you go to heaven.
Melchizedek had not restored Abram's strength, would he have had thoughts so clearly and been prepared once again to fight off the evil that was before him. In Christ, we have refuge. In fact, Christ has given us a spot at his table. Christ has offered us bread and wine. He gives us the physical. He gives us actually bread and wine. He gives us the physical elements which symbolize what's going on spiritually. In the same way, baptism, right? We're getting wet. We're going under, we're getting wet. It does nothing for us except get us wet. It is only a symbol of what's really going on. Cleansing of the inside. And so here, we have the bread and then we have the wine. And just as that bread and wine restores us, that it refreshes us, it renews us, just like it did Abram and his men, as to us. But it's not really the food and drink itself, but it is the very presence, the very fact that Christ is in us. That he restores us, that he reminds us every time that we take of the bread, every time that we take of the wine, he is reminding us of the grace bestowed upon us. Bread stands for the body of Christ, and it's by his strength that we press on. The wine, it stands for the blood of Christ. And it's because of his shed blood that we can rejoice over our salvation, even in the midst of our struggles. It's because of his shed blood that we rejoice in our salvation. Calvin wrote this. He says, Christ is the only food of our soul, and therefore our Heavenly Father invites us to him, that refreshed by communion with him, we may ever and anon gather new vigor until we reach the heavenly immortality. So when we show up on Sunday, we see we are having the Lord's Supper. We see those shiny domes over the bread and over the juice. We should fill with joy. We've had a long, wearisome week. We have fought battles, probably some of them we don't even remember, but we have fought battles time and time again. We have fought our own battles. We have helped other people fight their battles. We've had to pray for other people. We have had to come together and join with each other and pray and fight off the enemy. We've battled the enemy in 100 different ways, and we're tired, and we're weary, and we're hungry. And when we enter and we see those gleaming domes, we ought to rejoice, because it is the reminder, it is the time where God says, here, I am refreshing you. I am preparing you for the next week. Or for the next month. We ought to have our hearts flooding with thanksgiving. Because, as Spurgeon said, we are weary with fighting the Lord's battles, but we may expect Jesus will appear to our refreshment. Bread, battle, come to the blessing. The gospel propels us to action, go into battle. The gospel strengthens us with the bread and love. But it also renews a joy it expresses. There's a blessing with the gospel. So Abram's just finished his meal. Go back. Abram's just finished his meal. Melchizedek comes up to him and blesses him, right? Verse 19. We see this in verse 19 and 20. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hands. So again, let me give you three more observations that we see here in this blessing. The blessings spoken by Melchizedek is bestowed by God Most High. So you have to remember, at this point, this is not Israel. This is Canaan. Canaan is filled with a bunch of pagans. Abraham used to be a pagan until God called him out of paganism and to follow him. But these pagans that are around there, these aren't just polytheistic, right? They don't just have many gods. These are henotheistic. Henotheism is basically that there is a hierarchy of gods. There are some really good, great gods, high gods, and there are some lower gods here. And so there's this hierarchy of gods. Now Melchizedek, also being one of the followers of God, he doesn't necessarily look at the henotheism here, so he is saying so that all around, king of Sodom and those other kings that might be along with them and their people, that they understand that this blessing upon Abram is from the Most High God. There is no God greater than him. He is the one. He is the only. This is the Most High God. In his blessing, he points out that God is greater than all others. He is El Elyon, the God Most High. He's the possessor of heaven and earth. Some translations might say he is the creator of heaven and earth, but the actual word there really means to hold on to, it means to receive. He is the possessor of it. All that goes on in the heavens, all that goes on on the earth, all under God's control. He is the possessor of heaven and earth. Number two, the God who possesses heaven and earth is the God who delivered the enemies of Abram into his hands. Abram and his 318 men did not go out there and gain the victory just because they were really skilled at what they were doing. It wasn't just that they were really good. Much like what was going on with Gideon when he was fighting the Midianites. He only took 300 men with him, and then he rallied the Midianites. Because of what God did through him, giving him the victory. God gives us victory. We are hopeless without him. Number three, the blessings of Abraham, or Abram. Blessing to God are different types, not the same blessing. To Abram is a joy that comes from God. To God, it is the praise that comes from Abram. Melchizedek is the mediator between God and Abram. He's the mediator. He is blessing Abram on behalf of God, and he is blessing God on behalf of Abram. He's the go-between. Melchizedek is a type of Christ. Some, though this week finally I have been convinced of otherwise, but some would say that this is the pre-incarnate Christ. This is Christ in the flesh appearing to Abram, but before he was born. It's just reading more and more on it, I came to the conclusion that he's probably more just of a type of Christ than he is actually a pre-incarnate Christ. But the writer of Hebrews brought Melchizedek up. More is said about Melchizedek in the book of Hebrews than the entire Old Testament. The writer of Hebrews brings us up in the 7th chapter. If you want to go there, you can. Because that's where we're going to be ending. We don't have time to read it all, but I encourage you to go home, take your Bibles, and read it. What he says in the 7th chapter. But I want to point out some things. Number one, Melchizedek in the Hebrew, actually two words put together. One word is Melech, which means king. The other word is Zedek, which means righteousness. When you put the two together, Melchizedek, you have the king of righteousness. That's what the writer of Hebrews brings up here, but he says, but here's the thing, Melchizedek is the king of righteousness, but this man of Genesis 14 points to Christ, our righteousness. He is our king of righteousness. We don't have time to go there, but Isaiah brings this point up. Melchizedek is also said to be the king of Salem. I said Jerusalem. He's the king of Salem. In Hebrew, originally, they didn't have vowels. They just had consonants, which makes it really hard. But the letters here for Salem, S-L-M, are the same letters, and thus are of the same derivative as Shalom, S-L-M. So not only is Melchizedek called the king of righteousness, but he is the king of peace. Christ our peace. The king of righteousness is also the king of peace. All who are justified by Christ have peace with God. Isaiah tells us and prophesied that he is the everlasting Prince of Peace. Melchizedek, priestly king. That's something that the Mosaic law would not allow. Kings were kings, priests were priests, priests could not be kings, and kings could not be priests. It wasn't allowed. But Melchizedek was a priestly king. And just as Melchizedek was a priestly king, Jesus is a priestly king. And beyond that, he is also prophet. He is all three forms of God's leadership in Israel. He is prophet, priest, and king. It's that priesthood of Christ that I want to stop and focus on for just a moment. There in Hebrews chapter 7. Look at Hebrews chapter 7, verses 18 through 25. For on the one hand, a former commandment is set aside because of its weakness and uselessness. For the law made nothing perfect. But on the other hand, a better hope is introduced through which we draw near to God. And it was not without an oath. For those who formerly became priests were made such without an oath. But this one who was made a priest with an oath by the one who said, "The Lord has sworn, he will not change and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever." This makes Jesus the guarantor of a better covenant. The former priests were many in number because they were prevented by death from continuing in office. But he holds his priesthood permanently because he continues forever. Consequently, he is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. So like Melchizedek, the beginning of this is really about Melchizedek. Like Melchizedek, Jesus is the priest forever, making intercession for us. But did you catch the very first thing that we read? The law, with all of its demands, is useless. It cannot save you. It cannot deliver you. That's why he says it's weak and it's useless. You cannot draw near to God by being obedient to the law, whether it's in this life or it's in the next life. It doesn't matter. Jesus is the guarantor of a better covenant. It's not the covenant of the law, but of grace. Grace is receiving that which you don't deserve. And we draw near to God through Jesus because of this covenant of grace. We don't deserve it, but we have been given it. And it is because of Jesus that we have been given it. He goes on. He doesn't just stop, right? I mean, we are told, that in chapter 10, and a lot of us are used to this, to this verse, that once the sacrifice was made, once Jesus died and he rose again, he sat at the right hand of God because he was done. Well, he was done making the sacrifice. He was done giving the provision for salvation. But he's not done with us. He lives forever to make intercession as our priest. He lives forever to make intercession for us. In other words, he prays for us constantly in prayer. like Melchizedek, he is the mediator between God and us. And if you do not have him as your mediator, you have no access to God as Father. John makes it very clear. You started with John, we will live with John. John makes it very clear. To reject the Son is to reject the Father. To have the Son is to have the Father as well. And to have the Son as a mediator. He's blessing us on behalf of the Father. He is praising and blessing the Father